Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to the Ask Us Anything. I guess it's an AUA. We're glad to see you. So you probably know me already, but this is Josh. Josh is the managing director of the Boston office. So you handle sales and reviews and other managing things.
Yeah. And coding. I still get to code a couple days a week. So
Yep.
That's always nice.
Yeah, that is nice.
So
because you were a consultant before, doing development before, and now you're in a managing type role.
Yes. Yep. As much as I can.
Yeah, it's awesome. Frank asked, was this announced in the forum? I missed it. If so, I saw this on Twitter. No, it wasn't. In fact, we should make a thread of this. Oh, you make a thread on the forum pointing to the thing? Tom's going to try. But yeah, so if you have questions, throw them in the Q&A app and we'll get to them. You probably would be great to talk about managing developer people, running reviews, doing sales process at thoughtbot.
Yep.
And also development stuff. I mean, you're still slinging code, so tech stuff is fine too.
Yep. So the first question is going to Modern Masters 2015.
What is that?
It's for Magic the Gathering.
That's right. Yeah.
I am not planning on going to Modern Masters 2015. I primarily play Vintage. I don't really get into many other formats, but Vintage is definitely kind of my thing.
Yeah. How long have you been doing Magic?
I started probably in 95.
Okay.
Back then, I was in middle school and I really didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
I didn't really understand the value of the cards or anything. But probably about 3 years ago, I got back into Magic. And I think as a kid, it had always appealed to me. Like there's, some really expensive cards that are really powerful that, back then I didn't really have the money to play with. So I went and I just picked up a set of Power 9, which is purportedly the strongest 9 cards in the game. So, and have been kind of expanding my collection over the past 3 years.
It's fun to come back to games you played as a kid, as an adult with disposable income.
Yes.
So I remember like, wow, $40. Who could possibly afford that? And now it's like, yeah, well, I'm going to buy my way into victory.
Yeah. I'm on the edge of doing the same thing with Legos. Like I had a bunch of Lego sets for castles and stuff like that as a kid. And it's to a point where I might want to go and pick up some of the old sets, not any of the new stuff.
Yeah. Fair enough. I don't understand this. So hello to everyone that's here. If you have questions for us, just throw them in the Q&A app and we will tackle them one by one. And otherwise, we will end up standing here awkwardly, which no one wants. Or we could just pick topics. Yeah. How's your week going?
It's going well.
The camera's not actually on.
Oh, no.
There we go. We're back?
Okay.
Excellent. Now you can see our beautiful faces. Lucky for you. Let's grab this. So a question from Evan. How much CSS do the Ruby devs at thoughtbot do? Is it mostly done by the designers? I'm going to let you take that, even though I know the answer.
Most of the Ruby dev is done.
How much is the CSS?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it varies based on the person. There are a number of us who are comfortable working in CSS. Most of the time it is done by designers, but there's a couple developers specifically here in Boston I can think of off the top of my head who would be perfectly comfortable using Bourbon and Neat and kind of going to town on the design.
I think you're in that camp, right?
I am.
Yeah. Because I remember like pairing with you or something, and like there were times where I would just punt this off to designer at this point, but like you're like, we got this.
Yeah.
Because you used to or do still maintain some CSS framework?
Right. So probably, I don't know how many years ago, it was probably 6 or 7 years ago, I had gotten involved with Blueprint CSS. I had gotten involved with Blueprint CSS. It was hosted on Google Code, and I kind of pushed it to being hosted on GitHub. There was a number of Ruby scripts that kind of generated static files, kind of the output, so you could modify the grid and things like that. So I had kind of managed that transition and gotten involved, from a development side of things. I had started testing the CSS. As crazy as that seems. But I never actually did much of the framework development. So
gotcha.
It was much more on the Ruby side.
Okay, cool. But so it varies. But it's certainly something you don't have to do as a developer.
Right.
It's like if it's not your thing, just it's reasonable.
Exactly.
We usually draw the line there, right? Like developers doing Ruby / JavaScript, and then designers are handling HTML, CSS.
And I think the opposite camp is true as well, where you've got designers who are comfortable digging into JavaScript and have played with Meteor or Ember and things like that.
Yep.
So,
yep. I've even seen designers fix tests here, which is wonderful. Love that. Good question, Evan. All right, Mike, let's see. Thoughtbot seems to be exploding in growth over the past few years. It seems like that was a strategic change in the company to add growth so quickly. Can you provide some insight? It definitely was a strategic change. I mean, we said for years that we want to be like 20 people in Boston, basically. And I guess the biggest change was probably came from the partners in Chad in particular saying like, you know, we have this thing that we think is really great. We don't want to get any bigger in Boston, but we want to bring Thoughtbot to more people in a bigger way. And the way to do that is to open more offices.
Exactly. I think that the key point there is so much of the work that we do focuses around working co-located with our clients.
Right.
Because we found time and time again that the best way to really come up with a good product is making sure that we're working alongside them.
Yeah.
And then having direct access to their customers so we can do interviews and usability testing and things like that. So expanding to different offices means we can work with different types of clients right alongside them still.
Yep. And I remember talking to Chad about this, and he said the biggest thing that changed with him was like fear. Like he used to be afraid like we wouldn't, like it'd be too hard to do, basically we wouldn't be able to keep the culture consistent and all this. And he's like, I just got over that and decided we're going to try this and see what happens.
Right. Yeah. I've seen time and time again when people are afraid to execute something, it's so much of a hindrance that just the business, the company will suffer because of that. But you just got to get over it.
Yeah. And I think it's working out well.
Yeah.
I mean, we're up 120 people now.
It's right around 100. Yeah.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
So about 100. I mean, when I joined, we were 18-ish, probably fewer when you joined even.
I think I was there were 10 of us at that point. I think.
So, I mean, a huge change in just a few years. We hired like 40 people last year or some number like that. But it does actually still feel like one company and like still feels cohesive. And I feel like the culture is is fairly consistent between the offices. Like the things we believe and that we care about, we're still getting good people. So it seems like a success so far.
Yep.
This is gonna be right up your alley. When you are writing a Capybara RSpec test and do the setup, walkthrough, and then expectation, how important is it to scope viewable text? Like within foo, expect page to have CSS bar text baz. So scoping what you're looking for in the expectation. I think it is actually pretty important. I like that so just to be clear, like this is the within operator, which I think Capybara gives you.
Yep.
So it's like a within, and then you give it like a CSS selector, do expect page to have, hey, my name is John, whatever. And I don't always do this, but I think it's usually a good practice to get into. One, I've seen it eat up a lot of time when you don't realize that there are like two forms on the page. So I remember I had like a bug where like there was like a hidden login form that only got displayed sometimes, and then another form over here, and they both had a name field. And so like there was some ambiguity there, which I ended up, losing a half day to. But also I like just that it makes things explicit as opposed to implicit. It's like very clear about where you want things.
Exactly. It provides that context that says, okay, I know that I'm operating within, within this, with this element.
Yeah.
The most common example, the one that comes up a lot in my testing workshop is if you have multiple to-dos on a page, for example, and there's many actions that you could take on each to-do, you want to scope it to that one selector that kind of wraps that to-do itself. And then within that selector, click on mark this complete or delete this or, update the due date, so on and so forth. It's always going to be scoped to that one to-do item. So you
have a really nice blog post on this about using page objects. Do you remember what that's called? The title on that is?
I don't.
All right, just Google Thoughtbot page object Clayton, and you'll probably find it. One other thing that came to mind while you were talking is that it's possible to get false negatives or positives when you don't scope things. So for instance, like say like you try to create an item called Baz, and it's I should just see Baz on the page to make sure it worked. But you might have a like failed to create item Baz, or like Baz is a duplicate of existing thing. Like you could have like this thing that makes it look like your test passed, but it actually is not doing what you think it does.
And that's probably my biggest gripe with has content. That's why I avoid has content.
Interesting.
As much as possible, because I feel like it's not explicit enough. There is something to be said about using too explicit of CSS selectors. These data attributes and other ways to describe the data that you're seeing without relying too much on the hierarchy of the page, because that typically doesn't matter. But has content, I think, is too ambiguous for.
Interesting. Because that just pulls out the raw text of the page.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
you don't know if it actually is a link or if it actually is a whatever.
Right.
Cool. I hadn't thought about that. That makes a lot of sense. Good question, Andrew. If you're just joining us, submit questions through the Q&A app and vote up the ones that you want to see us answer. Andrew, we're going to hit you again. Thematic here. Within RSpec and Capybara, what is the purpose of putting helper methods into a module versus free-floating methods in a name_helpers.rb?
So free-floating methods define the method on object.
Yeah.
And you don't want to do that.
Free-floating methods.
Anything that's not wrapped within a module or a class will
Right.
be defined on a global namespace.
Yeah, and let's not do that.
Yep.
Let's not pollute that.
Yep.
Free-floating, but I think he's saying free-floating methods in a name_helpers.rb.
Right. So so name helpers would live in probably spec support, whatever helpers to RB. But if you're not defining that, if you're not defining those methods on a module,
right,
they are getting defined on the main object.
Yeah. So I put helper methods in two places. One is in a module that I then mix into the things that I want to have those methods available, or inside a describe block in a spec.
Yep.
If it's something not going to reuse yet, and makes sense to be sort of local. Within describes, that is its own anonymous class. And so you're not polluting object.
Correct.
So I put a lot of stuff in there.
Yep.
I like that a lot. Good questions, Andrew. This is interesting. Crispin asks, how would you describe the culture of thoughtbot and how do you promote it amongst a diverse group of employees? That's a big question. Like culture is a big thing. I always talk about a couple of the same ideas when I talk about culture. One is this mentality of we can always change things. There are no sacred cows. They're like all decisions can be looked at and improved. It's like I think that's one of the most important components to me is the fact that people are willing to try experiments about even ideas that we've done for a long time.
Right.
Like, hey, we write web apps in Rails. We have people writing web apps in Elixir and Haskell and all these other things. So it's like even stuff that's like seems like it'd be part of the DNA of the company is always up for debate and discussion.
Yep.
I think that's a really big part. Any other things stand out to you?
Involvement in the community, open source community, and getting involved in a bunch of different initiatives. It's great to see people kind of pursue those passions.
Yep.
And while it's not a requirement, I think it's kind of baked into, the DNA of a lot of the people who work here. They want to get out and get involved and help and see the community and other people grow. And that's great.
Yeah. And I remember being told, like when I first started here, Chad was like, we basically expect everyone to do a good job consulting. Like in a review, your review of like your abilities as a consultant should be like 2 minutes where it's like, you're doing a great job. And that's what we think everyone here should be doing.
Right.
And then the rest of it is like, what are you doing with your investment time? Like, or your other time? Like, what are you doing that makes the company better?
Right.
Like what, and it could be a million different things, right? Blog posting or, just introducing new ideas or open source or whatever. But there's this idea of like, we want to always be getting better as a company, as an organization. Anything else? How do we promote it amongst a diverse group of employees? That's actually a good question. As we open more offices, that's been a big a thing. Like, how do we keep this culture consistent? And so one of the things we've been doing is having people join an existing office for a certain amount of time, kind of get steeped in that culture, and then go off and start a new one.
Yep.
I think that helps.
Yeah,
and encouraging inter-office swapping. So if someone works in New York office wants to come to Boston, that's fine. Stockholm to Boston, like wherever. Like we can happy to have people mix around.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. I think there's the big ideas there. Sean asks, come on. Besides the Bourbon suite, what other front-end tools do you guys regularly use? Any Angular, React, Ember, etc.? Favorite testing tools? A lot of test questions in there. We are pretty regularly using Ember and Angular, I would say. Is that true?
I think it's, so there's been a transition. 3 years ago, it was Backbone. We had written a book about it. Most of the projects that we were seeing coming through, if there was any sort of interactivity on a client, it was always, Backbone was kind of our go-to. That switched to Angular, and I think more of that was actually driven by the request of the clients. That they had seen, oh well, there's the Google name behind it, so therefore it must be good. So we had gotten a number of requests, and we were definitely willing to try that. I think that the shift more recently, probably in the past 4 to 6 months, much more heavily towards Ember, and then there's been a number of developers, especially here in Boston, who have been getting into React as well.
Yeah.
So React Native was launched last night.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, exciting stuff down there.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I'm excited to see what people think of React once they start actually using it on projects and whatnot.
Yeah.
That'd be cool to see.
Mm-hmm.
Favorite testing tools? JavaScript testing is kind of always a wily thing. I feel like it's always kind of up in the air.
Yeah.
We use Jasmine for unit testing JavaScript. We still use that?
I think it varies so much, I think, based on the version of Rails.
Okay.
And what client-side framework you're using.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that the one kind of go-to that I've always had has been Kanacha, which is a hook into the Rails asset pipeline. You get Mocha and Chai kind of out of the box with that,
which are spies and stubs and things like that.
Yeah, it's a framework in the matchers, and that works pretty well. But you know, I haven't used Ember enough to say what they're using for unit testing. I believe it's QUnit, but don't quote me on that.
Okay. And then for integration tests, we usually use Capybara WebKit.
Yep.
To actually spin up the app and click on things. And yeah, that's our go-to. This is interesting. Frank asks, has thoughtbot played with Datomic? No, not really. I've looked into it personally. Do you know Datomic?
It's Clojure, and it's basically diffs on a database.
Basically, yeah. It's like a write-only database.
Okay.
So you basically record facts over time. You don't go back and update stuff. Like you always keep all your old data around. It's a really interesting model, and I think it lets you do some really cool things. We did a podcast a couple episodes ago with Craig Andera. So if you're interested in hearing, he's from Cognitite, the makers of Datomic. So if you're interested in a little more discussion on Datomic, it's worth checking out that podcast. But we haven't done anything with it in general. But it's not that we would never. I like the ideas behind it. I'm pretty into immutability as an idea in general. So immutable database seems pretty cool too. Sean asks, do you guys ever use active admin or similar tools? I find it makes prototyping the data model layer pretty quick and easy since it takes care of so much for you. I have strong opinions about this.
Ooh.
Yeah. We do use active I'm using Rails admin right now. Okay. We're using Rails admin on Upcase. And I'm not a huge fan. I agree that it does let you get up to speed quickly, but only for sort of the most simple kinds of CRUD operations that you need to do. And I feel like most apps quickly outgrow that, and you actually want to have a more fleshed out admin area. And it's not the case that you couldn't necessarily kind of use both, but I think if I were starting over today, I would create a admin area from scratch, and especially test drive it. Because one of the things we were, our policies are like not to test things that are already tested. And so it's like, well, Rails admin's already tested, so we don't need to like test Rails admin. And which turns out Rails admin's broken all the time. Because like we'll make a change, then forget to update something in Rails admin, and like we'll get an exception when we try to do stuff. So I'm not a huge fan. What do you think?
I think it depends on the app. I think, most of the questions, it boils down to, it depends on the app. I think if there's a lot of associated records and it's not easy to reason about them and the ways that they interact, I think something like a custom admin interface makes more sense, because you can kind of control and own what models people should be interacting with directly versus through other models. Whereas with active admin gives you access to everything. So not only do you need to know what the model names are, but you need to know how they interact with each other. And that can be frustrating. Yeah.
It seems like the simpler the app, the more you might want to use something like Rails admin. Which makes sense, I guess. But yeah, again, if I were starting over and I knew I was building Upcase again, I would just start with our own admin area.
And how much would you expose, I guess, versus, because obviously
not much. I mean, there's not many things like, I mean, I still jump at the console when I need to, like when I need to like do really nitty gritty weird changes, I'll jump at the console because I always have that option. So I don't need a point and click interface for lots of stuff. So there are a handful of things that are handy to do there. And so I think the admin area will be a lot smaller. It's just less functionality. It's not the worst idea to start with it though, Put it in there, and then if you need more, build something else. Let's see what we got here. Evan's asking, thoughtbot announced quite a few in-person workshops recently. Any plans to make these regular workshops? I want to go, but I'm out of town for all the Boston ones. I'm not sure, but I think they'll probably happen more regularly. We sort of spun them back up. They were dormant for a while. Upcase kind of was like our answer, like if you want workshops, do Upcase workshops.
Right.
And I still think that's a reasonable answer. But there is benefit to coming in person if you can. If you can pay the $1,000 or whatever it is and fly out here and stay here and be in the same room, that's certainly great too.
Right.
There's no denying that in-person workshops are awesome as well. So we sort of started them back up again because people wanted to, which is how a lot of things happen at thoughtbot. It's like someone wants to do it and it's like, all right, go do it. So yeah, I think they probably will end up happening more frequently. But again, it really does kind of come down to like, are we enjoying it?
Right. And I think that the big distinction between these now and what we were doing, a year or two ago, the ones a year or two ago were 2 or maybe even 3 days long. And it seems like the ones that we're running now are a day at a time, which I think makes it more convenient for a lot of people, especially out of towners where, if you have to pay for a bunch of hotel and, all the other, it makes it a lot more difficult to get away from work. So I think the one day is enough information to kind of glean and walk away from it and actually go be effective, depending on the scale, obviously. Like if you go to the Ember workshop, which we're running on Monday, if you were to attend that, you're not going to go and build, a fully client-side app, on day one. But it's a step in the right direction. It'll give you the tools to know, okay, well, now I know where to look and now I know how to start.
Yeah, so I should go to that workshop.
You should.
I don't know almost anything about Ember. Okay. Frank. Hey, Frank. Frank asks, I run a local Ruby meetup. I'm looking for some ideas. What is your favorite thing about your local Ruby meetup that can be implemented in another meetup? That's a good question. What's my favorite thing? What's your favorite thing about Boston RB?
The diversity of the speakers. I think it's great. You get people both within the Boston community, and then they invite guests from outside the community. And I think that's key. I think, depending on the scene in various cities, you're going to see different types of projects, different types of interests.
Right.
Locally, we've got a lot of people who are interested in Ember from thoughtbot and Dockyard and other companies in and around the area. In San Francisco, that may be totally different. They might be doing a lot more Angular.
So bringing them in would be a good way to change.
Yeah, if your meetups are skewed to what you're seeing locally, it might be great to get other viewpoints and see what people are doing in other places. Yeah,
and this is probably obvious, but like Boston RB has there's a social component to it at the end, right? Like there's pretty consistently after the meetup, like people go to a bar or something. And I mean, drinking, of course, is optional, but you can just go and talk to people.
Right.
And I think that's good to have it. Some sort of like established social part of it at the end or at the beginning or whatever, but just to make sure people have time to kind of mill around and just talk to each other. I think that's a worthwhile thing too.
Yep.
When I was in Portland, I went to the Portland PDX Ruby, and they had someone bring in like a code challenge.
Okay.
And so he like threw out like a little code challenge and said like, pair up with people and like get in groups of like 2 or 3 or 4 and work on it. It only took like 15 minutes. But it was nice. It like kind of broke the ice, gives you an excuse to like grab 2 people around you and just kind of sit down and like write some code together. So I thought that was a nice trick to get people interacting.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Yeah. Frank, consider that like your goals. I guess I would approach this by trying to figure out what the goals are of the people that are showing up. Like, are they trying to find jobs? Are they trying to get better at Ruby? Are they trying to learn new technologies? And sort of take the temperature of the room and figure out what the goals are of the participants, and then structure the meetups around that. You're probably gonna end up with something pretty compelling.
Yep.
So Sean asked, do you think Upcase could eventually allow users to upload their own code/libraries for review and feedback? You could do that right now. If you posted a post in the forum and linked to a gem you wrote, I think people would take a look at it. I probably would. You could probably trick me into doing that. Will we ever have an official thing like that? I'm not sure. It's certainly a possibility. One thing that we are doing is we've released coaching. So we're doing now, you can actually get a thoughtbot coach for 4 hours. I think it's $800 or something. It's like a half day of pairing. I think it's around, so it's coaching.thoughtbot.com. So if you wanted like a really in-depth code review with someone and you want like live feedback, you could avail yourself of that. But honestly, like I think people are willing to look at stuff and help out. And like, I think I see really great comments on the forum when people post threads, when they post code for feedback. So I would just start with that and see what you get. Might actually work for you. David asks, do you think differently about building Rails apps with high availability and cloud infrastructure in mind, compared with a single compute model? Do you? Have you faced this? I haven't really had to build a super high availability app.
I think the closest that comes to mind that I've worked on in recent years has been Hoptoad now air break.
Yep.
You know, there was a point where we were handling probably 40,000 RPM and sub 50 millisecond response times. And that was, you know, it was a lot of traffic, and we had to be very quick about how to handle that, ingest it, make sure that we said, okay, yes, we've got it, and then get it into the database. So,
and I think so. And so did you think differently about building the app under those restraints?
No, because we didn't know it was ever going to get that big. You know, it's like, you know, it grows and it grows and it grows, and it you know, there comes a point where you're at, you know, 5,000 RPM, and you're like, okay, things are working well. And then, you know, 10 and 20 and then 40, it's just, they're totally different animals.
Yeah.
Especially to make sure that you keep the response times down.
One of the things I mean, sort of the accepted wisdom on optimization in general is like, don't try to guess, right? Like, don't try to build it in such like, well, I think we're going to probably have a ton of this traffic, so I got to make sure that this thing is fast, right? Because you just tend to guess wrong on what's going to actually be slow, where your bottlenecks are. And so we just sort of took the approach of like, figure them out as they come.
Exactly.
Don't guess what's slow, profile it with real traffic, and then go focus your efforts there. Exactly. But I don't think I've never built an app starting from that, like, okay, this is going to get a ton of traffic. How do we build it personally? I'm not sure that would be productive. As they say, you'll never know less than you know now, right? So guessing early is potentially not so good. Sean asks, any plans with Hound or Upcase to automate some of the code reviews / feedback? Ruby has some pretty awesome static analysis tools now, like Rubocop. Could it be extended to detect stuff like the dependency inversion principle can be applied here? This is definitely something that's been on my mind. It would be awesome to turn on Hound for all of the Upcase exercises. Unfortunately, Hound expects everything to be on GitHub, and Upcase exercises are not. So it would be very non-trivial for Hound to suddenly start working on Upcase. Not only does it have to review repos from a different place, but it has to comment in a different place. So they probably did not build in a handy adapter pattern that I can just drop in there. And even if they did, I don't think the Hound team would be like super psyched about it. Now you're supporting this whole new interface that could potentially break and blah, blah, blah. Rubocop is definitely something that could actually work though. So we have a template that is like the base exercise template. So we could throw Rubocop in there with like a built-in test where we fail your test suite if you have Rubocop violations. And that I think is actually more likely to happen. And that's nice because it actually catches it sort of right away, like right when you're committing effectively. Could it detect stuff like the dependency inversion principle can be applied here? Yeah, I mean, I think so. I don't know if Rubocop is sophisticated enough for that. I would love to see static analysis tools detect that in general, though, in the future. Like there are certain, I think you couldn't, that might be tough. You could get certain, I've been thinking about exercise specific rules you can throw in there, like fail the test suite if anyone in this exercise uses a struct. Like there are certain times like I just always see people like reaching for struct, and I always like leave the same comment like, don't use structs because of this. Here's this article you should read, blah, blah, blah. And so there are certain things that are not quite as advanced as that, but I think would still be useful that we could use to sort of fail suites.
Like law demeter. You could
probably, you could probably detect law demeter violations, things like that. If you have an exercise that's about going back to this example, that's about injecting dependencies, and you see, you know, .new in the class body, it's like, well, you didn't quite get it because you're still building a dependency in there. So we probably could do something like this. I like that idea. I like that the feedback's fast. You don't have to wait for anybody to come along and tell you something that, you know, might be kind of obvious once you know the principle. That's a good question, Sean. Pull request welcome. All right. Does thoughtbot ever utilize, you capitalize thoughtbot, Crispin, that's such a sin. I'll forgive you though. Does thoughtbot ever utilize or have opinions on any of the alternative Ruby implementations like JRuby or Rubinius? Why or why not? I don't, pretty rarely, I would say. We use MRI Ruby almost all the time. We deploy to Heroku in general. I don't know if that limits you. You probably still use JRuby, I guess, on Heroku and whatnot.
Yeah, I actually don't know.
Yeah,
I have to imagine that they would allow for JRuby.
Yeah, I guess we haven't really. So I've heard there's folklore I've heard of like trying to make JRuby work is kind of a pain. Compatibility has been a pain with that, I guess. Rubinius, I don't know. I guess we haven't had an itch that was scratched by those implementations. Exactly.
I think JRuby, the biggest thing has been, you know, you're using a different set of gems that if you've been on MRI, you can rely on C extensions, and that works great. But, you know, going into JRuby, if you don't know what you're getting into, you know, and that's not to say that there aren't gems which handle that and run on JRuby, but if you're expecting it to just say, okay, I'm going to switch from MRI Ruby to JRuby and everything's going to work, I won't have to change my gem file, that assumption is probably wrong.
Right.
So
yeah. Okay. Sorry, JRuby and Rubinius. I think you are good ideas with good projects and whatnot, but
yeah,
we have not found a niche for you. David is asking, have you used VCR in your tests? Do you stub HTTP interactions in your tests? Yes and yes. Kind of and yes is what I would say. You're not a VCR fan. Do you want to do a VCR rant? Or what are the downsides of potentially of using VCR?
Yeah, so I don't have anything wrong with the project in and of itself, and I think it's maintained very well. The gripe that I have is that you end up coupling yourself. It introduced mystery guests. There's a number of issues that kind of get tacked along when you introduce VCR. The mystery guessing is probably one of the biggest things, just because I've gotten bitten by it so many times.
Can you clarify what that is?
Yes. So the mystery guess is basically you write an assertion.
It's a test smell.
It's a test smell.
Yeah.
You write an assertion, or you're interacting or relying on data that was defined outside of the test itself and is not immediately obvious as to where it was defined.
Right.
So one example that I can think of is if you're integrating with a payment platform like Braintree or Stripe, and you use VCR and you get back a customer token, and you're asserting against that customer token to make sure that it was, entered in a database correctly. There's no way to tell where that token is coming from, unless you know that, yes, this came from the actual cassette itself.
Right.
And the problem is if you rerun it, that string, that token might change.
Right. So yeah, I've seen something similar. It's like, oh, like we'll make a payment, and then and the test will just suddenly say, and the payment amount should be $12.29.
Right.
And you're like, why should it be $12.29? There's nothing in the test that tells you where this value came from, and that smell is the mystery guest. It's like a thing that showed up, and no one knows its provenance. No one knows where it came from, and it's very hard to use VCR and not introduce the mystery guest smell.
Yep.
Versus stubbing HTTP interactions, which we do explicitly per test, let's say. So like, okay, I know I'm going to charge something on the Stripe. I'm going to stub out Stripe's HTTP and to return that we charge $12. You say that in the test, and then expectation when it says it should be $12, mystery guest smell is gone.
Right.
We often also write, so we will sometimes stub things. We often write fakes as well for services that we are going to do a lot of interaction with.
Right.
If there's a reasonable way to write a sort of fairly simple fake implementation of something, we do that sometimes.
Yeah, I think fake is probably my default go-to. And the reason why is more often than not, we're using gems or writing wrappers to interact with APIs. And it's less about the endpoints and the data that you're passing along, because this wrapper will manage that for you. And then we have the actual, active record models or whatever we're using that's actually interacting with the wrapper, which is doing the underlying HTTP calls. And more often than not, I don't actually care what those calls are, because the wrapper manages that. So I would test the wrapper, make sure the wrapper is interacting with the API correctly and making the correct calls with the correct parameters. But the actual code that I interact with day to day is relying on that wrapper. So what I would do in my tests is that I would swap out the wrapper. And when swapping out the wrapper with a fake, you also introduce ways to override or provide responses that you can assert against.
Right. Like we want this transaction to fail, and you can tell the fake to say return a fail response.
Exactly. So you're coupled much less to the endpoints themselves, because if there's a wrapper, you can test that independently, and you care more about the actual Ruby interactions. So, and that's really, especially at an acceptance level test, that's what I care about is the Ruby level interactions. I don't care about the nitty gritty of the requests and responses.
Gotcha. Cool. Okay. Frank asked, have you considered moving to Puma? Why or why not?
I don't think it's come up yet.
Yeah, I don't think so
It
either.
seems compelling. When you look at numbers, it's like, okay, this is faster.
It's fast, cool.
This seems nice.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of our projects have used it.
Yeah.
I think by default, we just use Unicorn, especially when we're deploying to Heroku.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's a reason not to. It's just
we haven't.
I don't know if we've had the opportunity to, or we haven't. I haven't really pushed for it.
Yep. Frank asked, how do you deploy compiled assets to an asset host? It's like Fastly.
Yeah. Guess again.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Okay, there you go. Dan Croak has done a couple posts, I think, about how we do this.
I think both he did, and then Jesse Young, one of our developers in San Francisco. I think they've both written posts on Fastly.
Yeah, so check out our blog for Fastly, posts by Dan Croak or Jesse Young, and you probably have get that answered. Hey, Anthony, how's it going? Anthony is asking, hey guys, I have a really messy Stripe donation controller where the same donor comes to give, it finds them in the database and charges to the existing customer. Okay. Oh, here's a link. Any tips to refactoring this monster controller? Does
it auto link? Oh, it doesn't.
It doesn't. I'm gonna pull up your thing, and I'm gonna give you a 5-second code review.
Is it a public link?
Can I share this? I think everybody else in the Q&A can see these things. Let me drop the link in chat.
Okay.
Oh, watch out for that backslash. There's the link. Or can I share the screen? Let's see. Showcase? No.
That doesn't. No, it's the green arrow or the box.
Ah, yes. Okay. Yep. All right, everyone. We're going to share the screen with you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that wasn't super surprising. Okay. Let's check out this link.
Yep.
Hopefully this is safe for work, Anthony. Okay. Donations controller. Remove this white space right here. What is this? Why is everything commented out?
Okay.
Okay. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to look at. The commented out version or the not commented out version?
Is there a chat that maybe he could answer that question quickly?
I don't think so. Where are we? All right, let's pretend it's this one. Monthly donation with existing Stripe customer, one-time donation, monthly donation, one-time donation. So Anthony, by the way, this is why it's not good to have commented code around, because it's hard to tell if it's important or not. Wow. Create site plan. Okay, so I'm going to pick a small part of this just to focus on. Maybe not. Charge existing Stripe customer, charge new Stripe customer. Okay, so one thing you might want to think about is I see a lot of stuff that's dedicated to creating Stripe charges here and plan creation. This could be a good thing to pull out into some sort of service object, also known as just an object. Mm-hmm. Give a class responsibility for creating customers, creating plans, things like that. Like move this logic out, pass it what it needs in terms of data, but have the actual building of the plan hash and the creation of the plan happen outside this controller. Will likely improve this a little bit. Create subscription for existing customer. Sure.
Yeah, you have two payment creates. Is there anything that's similar?
I am seeing, I'm seeing a lot of duplication here. Like this method looks a lot like this method. Mm-hmm. Pull out the parts that vary and reuse the parts that don't. Like find a way to reuse this. Mm-hmm. Like this looks so similar that I can't believe you can't make a generic method that just accepts a couple overrides that you could pass into it to override certain things.
Yep. The big difference looks like the customer ID.
Yep.
So one is being pulled from the database and the other one is coming from the customer ID. And
it almost looks like you copied and pasted this one down here, which is fine to do it first, and then you have to extract a method. Like copy paste should be like your biggest sign, like, okay, that's step one, but it's never the last thing you do. Right. Copy paste, figure out what varies, and then extract a method for the common stuff and reuse that. Like you can just by sort of glancing at this, like we can see duplication here, creep it in here as well. Plan create, charge create. I mean, these are actually charge create and charge create, for example. Mm-hmm. Things like that pull into a method, different methods. And think about, I also see we have monthly donations and one-time donations. Maybe these are actually two different controllers. Maybe there's a monthly donations controller and a one-time donation controller, mm-hmm. and that will probably let you simplify this as well. So hopefully that was helpful. If you can also feel free to post on the forum if you want other people to weigh in. But yeah, get rid of it. Make sure it's clear which of the code is important, commented out or not. Okay. Crispin, is there a particular conference you'd recommend for a first software conference? First one. I don't know. How about you?
That's tough. I think it depends on the person, to be
Yeah.
honest. Like there's been, some local Ruby conferences where it's maybe 80 or 100 attendees. And I love those because they're typically single track. They're 1, maybe 2 days long.
Yep.
And it feels much more personal. If you were to go to RubyConf or even RailsConf, there's going to be hundreds of people there.
Thousands.
Yeah. And if you don't know anybody, it might be, you might be out of your element or not feel comfortable going and talking to new people. It's also hard to kind of reason about what makes the most sense. Like there's, there might be 3 different paths, and at that point you have to know
simultaneous tracks going on, so you have to pick like which one you're gonna go to.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I guess it depends on, like, I would just check out the websites and see what has the right vibe for you.
Yep.
I guess.
Yep.
Like if you want something small and intimate versus something big and crazy and lots happening, that would probably be a good way to decide. I think you're going to learn similar things at every conference. Really, don't think of conferences so much as great opportunities to learn. I think they're great opportunities to meet people,
right?
And learn a little bit, or at least get inspired to look at ideas more. So I wouldn't worry too much about which one you pick. I think they're all pretty good at hooking up with people, which is what's important. Yep. So David asks, when writing tests after the code has been written, what is the first test you write? When writing tests after the code has been written, what is the first test you write? How do you proceed through a class? How do you decide what not to write a test for? So I do TDD almost 100% of the time. So I'm almost never coming back to code that does not have tests. Right. So I'm a little bit out of my element here. The book I always recommend for situations like this is Working Effectively with Legacy Code by Michael Feathers. That's like the Bible on this kind of thing. He talks about bringing untested code under test at length, and has a lot of really good strategies for how to do that. Do you have any additional thoughts you want to add on that?
Yeah, I think at a very high level, typically I start at an acceptance level test first and foremost, because really at the end of the day, if you're trying to test something that already works, you want to test it at a very high level. That allows you to get kind of that baseline. So if you were to want to refactor or do anything like that, at least you have a test there that hopefully, one or many tests, I guess, there at an acceptance level that will hopefully give you a fair bit of confidence that you can go and refactor, restructure things without blowing things up.
Yep. Cool. That's good advice. How do you decide what not to write a test for? I generally just write a test for most things.
What about like view tests or
okay, that's a good point. Yeah. So I don't tend to I don't want to retest things. So if given that we write a lot of integration or a decent amount of integration tests, I don't go back and then write controller tests that are going to exercise the same path.
Right.
And then view tests, I wouldn't test like that certain CSS happens, but sometimes you do want to say like the markup should look like this. Right. Kind of depends on how important it is and how brittle the test is going to be. And it's all about weighing those trade-offs, like the rest of software.
Right. And it takes a lot of practice.
It does.
There's never one straightforward answer for that.
You'll never be done with learning that and just master it. That's just kind of the way it goes. Do you know what this is?
JSONB?
Yeah.
A little bit.
You want to talk about it?
Yeah.
Okay. Sean asked, the new Postgres indexable JSONB column type seems pretty awesome. Feels like the best of both worlds to be able to have your relational data living next to flexible document style data. Have you guys used it in any apps? Have you?
In Boston, I don't think so. But we were evaluating it earlier today, actually.
Oh, okay.
And the reason why was, there was a lot of records in the database, over 30 million. And we wanted to add metadata to a number of those records. And then any records that were being added to the database would definitely have that metadata attached. Originally, we had thought, we would use access taggable on and be able to add the metadata that way and just use contexts to say, okay, well, for this context, we're going to tag it with these 2 items. And with this different context, it's going to be a totally different set of data. The problem with that is if you were to tag it with, say, location information, if it was like a city and a state, and you wanted to do geospatial querying against that data, because it's just a string, and because it's not, it wouldn't be treated as a latitude and longitude, even if you were to geocode it and keep it as a tag. There were some issues with the way that we would interact with that data. So JSONB, the thought there was because each of the values is typed, you would have a little bit more flexibility, so you could actually store a lat long and be able to query against it.
Okay.
And I guess with Heroku, you can set a flag to run Postgres 9.4, and that will give you access to the JSONB type.
Cool.
On Heroku.
Nice. So cool. This is why it's better for me to not do this alone. Andy says, recently I've seen many jobs advertised which are looking for full stack developers. As someone who traditionally has a focus on backend, should I invest effort in learning more front end skills or focus on becoming a better backend developer? That's a good question. I'm curious what you think about that.
It is. Full stack is always such a loaded term.
Yeah. What does that even?
Yeah, it's really tough to say. I kind of envision full stack is, you know how to deploy an app, you know how to write the backend app and manage the database, or at least interact with the database.
You can write SQL if you need to.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then probably some amount of front end, maybe not full visual design, but definitely HTML and the actual implementation in ERB.
JavaScript.
Yep. And JavaScript too.
Right. I guess, yeah, I think I would probably apply to these jobs anyway, and then see what their definition, or like talk to them, like try to hook up with someone from the company. And so like, when you guys say full stack, what do you actually mean? Because you may actually have all the skills that you, that they're looking for.
Right.
I think it's one of those terms, like it's like growth hacking or something, where it's just kind of like, there's like the generic idea of what it is, but people have different definitions.
Right.
Should I invest more effort in learning more front-end skills or becoming a better back-end developer? I guess it depends on, I would personally go with whatever you like better.
Yep.
I think there's plenty of work for people that just do back-end stuff. There's plenty of work for people that can do, you know, all of it pretty well. It just depends on like, what do you like most? Because I think that's what you're going to get the best at, is what you want to learn anyway.
Right. And the types of companies you want to work for.
Right.
I think for an early stage startup, you need to be way more flexible and be able to hop in, and, you know, it's you're wearing many hats.
Exactly.
And the ability to kind of bounce between those different skill sets is pretty valuable.
Yeah, exactly. So think about where you want to work and what you like to do, and then proceed accordingly. Evan asks, any plans to add more OOP trails to Upcase, stuff like using decorators, facades, / all those design patterns? Yes, definitely. That is a great idea. I don't think we have anything in progress right now along those lines, but it's certainly something that we could do. There are a lot of weekly iteration episodes about that. If you haven't started digging into those, Joe and I have talked about various design patterns a whole bunch, but we could definitely do a trail as well.
Yeah. It's always so tricky though. I think, you know, what I've seen time and time again, you know, there's the design patterns, the Ruby book, and there's a number of books out there that are valuable for that. But the number of times that I reach for a design pattern is so little, like it's very, very infrequent. So to kind of ingest all that knowledge, oftentimes it's tempting to say, okay, I'm going to apply this design pattern in this project in the next week. And if it doesn't really fit, you're going to regret it. So it definitely requires a bit of understanding of when it should be applied and how it's best applied.
Yeah, but you do have to know about it first, right? Like you have to learn that it exists.
Exactly.
And everyone goes to that phase after they learn about it. They're kind of like jamming it everywhere. But I guess it's worth having that knowledge in the first place. So I think it's worth having some stuff on that. That's a good suggestion. Thanks, Evan. Look at this FactoryGirl question. So it's cool. Andrew says it's cool that the Bourbon Trail is out. I agree. I have been struggling with FactoryGirl and left wondering if this resource or other thoughtbot products will be seeing their own demo / tutorial. Unfortunately, taking this up solo has been difficult, only using the docs. So I guess the gist of this is, would we make a tutorial about FactoryGirl, like a trail? I mean, I guess we could.
You really could. I think there's enough there.
It's a pretty big tool.
Yes. Yep.
It's interesting. So we've sort of stayed away from tutorials around particular tools, instead sort of focusing on more general ideas, like how do you do good OO design, like what's solid, things like that. But I think there actually is a pretty big market, and it's useful, I think, to have things that are even targeted at specific gems. Like look at how popular Railscast was, and that was for a reason. It's because it lets you come in and sort of get the gist of a thing and then get your task done.
Exactly.
So I think that's something we could certainly do. And we have, you know, the current maintainer. Are you still maintaining?
Yep.
Maintainer of FactoryGirl standing right here. So maybe I could corral you into making a little FactoryGirl trail. That's a good question, Andrew. Do you know what this is?
No.
Okay. No, Sean, we've never built anything with dcell. I'm just going to delete your question. Sean asks, do you guys ever use database features other than basic tables / indexes with the Rails apps? Things like views or maybe even Postgres' table inheritance. We have done some of this.
We've done views. I can't think of any time where we've done table inheritance, but we've done views. The apartment gem allows for multi-tenancy. I don't know how that interacts with Postgres specifically, but I think it leverages some Postgres features.
Yeah, views have been helpful.
Mhm.
Yeah. Not often. I find I mean, it seems like we mostly get away with tables and indexes, and that's pretty much does the trick. I guess if we were working with much larger data sets, we would need to get more fancy with what we're using. Frank is asking, if you're just joining us, throw questions in the Q&A app and we will tackle them. Frank asks, I'm deciding between Ruby and Clojure. What aspect of the project would drive the decision to use Clojure instead of Ruby? With the caveat that I haven't built that many projects in Clojure, I actually might come back to like, what do you want to do? Like what you're passionate about, but let's be a little bit more pragmatic than that. Clojure is pretty darn strong at concurrent processing. So if you have something that's going to benefit from being able to spin up a whole bunch of cores and churn through a bunch of data, Clojure has really great tools built into the language for that. So that would be a really good choice. It's also very fast. It's a JVM language. So again, if you think you were going to end up writing a Ruby app that is going to get constrained by CPU throughput, Clojure is a really nice choice as a counterexample. It's also a great language. So if you're looking to, I mean, I sometimes will just build stuff in different languages just because I want to, even if it's not 100% the best thing. Like we extracted a part of Upcase as a Haskell service, and it's not because like this is like the best business decision possible is to have a Haskell service that parses diffs, but like we kind of wanted to do it, and we think it will pay off later in other ways. And so I think it's okay to kind of experiment and try new things, even if it's not the best decision immediately. The best immediate decision. So it is 3:30. It's been an hour. If I'm going to give maybe 10 seconds to submit any last questions, and then we'll wrap up because actually there's nothing in the queue. So this is actually kind of a nice stopping point. So if you have a last minute question, throw it in there now or forever hold your peace. You have 10 seconds.
What if someone types slowly?
That's too bad.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, 2 questions. All right. Last 2 questions. I'm not sure this is. Frank says, regarding apartment, have you found any downsides yet? What's apartment?
So it handles multi-tenancy.
Oh, okay. Is it a gem?
It's a gem.
Okay.
It's a gem.
I still don't understand multi-tenancy.
So typically what you would do is you would introduce another foreign key on an object, and then you would scope everything to that foreign key.
Okay.
So an example there would be if you were signed in and you were on a blogging platform.
Okay.
You sign in as a user. All the posts that you have written, you would say your current user .posts.
Yep.
And that would scope everything to what you've authored.
Yep.
Right. So multi-tenancy basically simulates that at a database level.
At a database level. Okay. So
instead of having to scope everything to your user, you just set. You can switch between. I'm not familiar with the actual low-level Postgres side of things.
Yeah.
But you can switch through, and I think how it works is everything is kind of compartmentalized, and you don't actually have to introduce any of that scoping or foreign keys.
So you still have. Oh, you don't.
Right.
So you still have one database.
You still have one database.
But to each tenant that logs in, it's like they're the only person in the database.
Exactly.
Yeah. And somehow that's done.
Right.
For you. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. I guess we don't have any apartment experience.
Yeah. I guess from a downside perspective, there's not anything that I've seen, but I haven't used it too much. I think more typically I would just lean towards using foreign key constraints and scoping data that way over, going for the apartment job.
Okay. Okay, we have 3 questions. We'll make these last 3. From Sean. Sean says, do you guys host any of your own applications, or do they all live on Heroku? They pretty much all live on Heroku.
Yep.
High 90% of them.
Yeah.
We don't host any of our. We host actually the Git server for Upcase. The server that you push to and pull from is we host it, I guess, on DreamHost or something.
Okay.
But that's like whenever we can avoid that, we do.
Right.
We don't. We're not super into managing servers at all.
Yeah. It's a pain in the butt.
Yep. Crispin asks, when writing complex SQL queries, do you tend to reach towards AREL or just use SQL? Do you ever get disillusioned with the whole idea of ORM?
I typically just go to AREL.
Yeah.
Yep. What I'll do is I'll whip it together with raw SQL and just get something out there that I feel comfortable with. And then backport. And then typically if I'm interacting with AREL, I put it in a query object and keep it there instead of mudding up the model and putting it in there.
Yeah, query object just being a class that holds that query for you.
Exactly.
And accepts like a base model or something like that.
Yep.
Yep. I like that. There's some examples of that in Upcase, I believe. So if you search for like something query, you can see some examples of us doing that. Do we ever get disillusioned with the whole idea of ORM? No, I prefer it to writing SQL.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I remember the days of 500 line long stored procedures, and I prefer not to go back to that.
More disillusioned about that.
Yeah.
And last question from Evan. What are the education backgrounds like at thoughtbot? Are lots of people from comp sci / technical degrees? How much does someone's educational background matter when evaluating applicants? That's a good question. The backgrounds are very mixed. I failed out of a CS program. We have people that have philosophy degrees, and Chad, I think it was like a poli-sci major or theater or something. I would not say that most people are from comp sci or technical degrees. So someone's educational background doesn't matter at all. Actually, I wasn't asked about my education at all when I applied here.
Likewise.
So I guess it matters 0.
Yep.
It's about show some code,
Yep.
show some proof of passion. Like, do you have a blog? Do you have a GitHub that's contributed to regularly? Do you are you involved in the community? Things like that. And that's what counts.
Yep.
And degrees, we have not found to have a predictive effect on how good people will be here.
Yep.
So we don't look at them. By the way, thanks, Tom. If you'd like to check out, we have a great podcast called Reboot, where thoughtbotters actually share their story of switching from another career into tech. So you can go to rebootshow.fm to look at that. It's actually been getting great reviews. People seem to like it a lot. Interviews with thoughtbotters who changed into here. So I think we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you found this useful. If you have feedback, you can throw out the forum or just shoot us an email. Josh at thoughtbot,
Josh at thoughtbot,
Ben at thoughtbot, and we'll see you next time.